Okay, chapter 2 of book 3 is called The Grindstone. We are going to get a lot of important plot details here, starting with Mr. Lorry at the Paris branch of the Tellson's Bank. It says that Tellson's is established in the Saint-Germain quarter of Paris. This is actually pronounced Saint-Germain. That's my very subpar French, but it is a very lovely area on the left bank of Paris. I wrote here it's pretty bougie. It's like full of little art galleries and boutiques, and I'm sure it was still very much that way during this time. It's a nicer area of Paris. It goes on to say that Mr. Lorry's Tellson's Bank branch is actually established in a wing of an aristocrat's home. And the aristocrat is the Monseigneur who, in the beginning of the book, had the party and was the man who had his chocolate. That was like his ritual, was to have the chocolate. So the Monseigneur in the city, it says here, it belongs to the same home, or is part of the home of that same Monseigneur, the preparation of whose chocolate, for whose lips had once occupied 3 strong men besides the cook in question. So he's not living, the bank is not in the entire home. It's in a part of the home. The rest of the home has been taken over by revolutionaries. And so it describes that, the Monseigneur fled, or he was somehow taken, or he's left, obviously, this property, and the revolutionaries have moved in. They've painted revolutionary words on the outside of the building. They have flags hanging everywhere. And we do get a date reference. They're saying it's the 3rd night of the autumn month of September. So now we have some idea how much time has passed. Remember that Charles Darnay left on August 14th, and it says that when we know he's had a few days in this prison, most likely. So if it's the 3rd day of autumn, September, I'm thinking that, maybe it took him 10 days or so, maybe 2 weeks to get to Paris. I've always been sort of wondering about how long it took him to actually get from London to Paris. So this gives us some idea. This next paragraph is basically describing the interior of the bank building and how different it is from British decorations, because it had once been an aristocrat's home. There's cupids everywhere and fancy detailing and everything. And it says that it's very different from the way that British people would have decorated during that time. It also goes on to say that all the money in Tellson's Bank, a lot of it is sitting there because the depositors have been rusting in prisons, and many of them have been killed, and how many accounts with Tellson's never would be balanced in the world. And so this is the problem that Mr. Lorry is dealing with, is that he's sort of guarding a lot of money and possessions in the bank that belong to people who have either died or who are sitting in prison. It's very cold in September, which is unusual. So I think this is also sort of an ominous weather reference. And everything in the room in Mr. Lorry's mind has a shade of horror. So a lot of this, the references to the decorations, the cold, and all these things are helping to create this very sort of ominous and scary mood. It says that Mr. Lorry occupied rooms in the bank, and his fidelity to the house, of which he had grown to be a part, lies strong root ivy. It chanced that they derived a kind of security from the patriotic occupation of the main building. So it's interesting that the money of the aristocrats is somewhat protected by the fact that the revolutionaries have set up in the rest of the house, because this is like ground zero for the revolutionary cause. A lot of people are sort of, are occupying this area and coming back to this area for planning. And so in some ways that kind of makes Mr. Lorry safe, which is sort of interesting. And of course, the fact that he's British too. It talks about that in the courtyard outside the house, there are carriages, and there are big flaming flambeaux, like torches. And then there's a large grindstone, a roughly mounted thing which appeared to have hurriedly been brought there from some neighboring smithy or other workshop. So as we read here, we'll discover that a grindstone, which is the name of this chapter, is a large stone that is turned to so it creates like a friction between two stones to sharpen knives. And so there's going to be a lot of pretty disgusting imagery surrounding this grindstone. So it says here that Mr. Lorry says to himself, "Thank God that no one near and dear to me is in this dreadful town," which of course is not true. He has no idea that Charles Darnay is in prison, but he looks out, from the bank windows and he sees all these things going on, and he just realizes like things are terrible, and thank goodness nobody he loves is there. But of course that's going to change really soon, because all of a sudden his door suddenly opened and two figures rushed in, at sight of which he fell back in amazement. It was Lucy and her father. So Dr. Manette and Lucy have come to Paris, and they have found Tellson's bank, and they run into his rooms, and Lucy has her arms outstretched, and of course she's very upset. And Mr. Lorry is like, "What are you doing here? What is the matter? What has happened?" And Lucy says, "My husband." And Mr. Lorry says, "Your husband? Charles, what happened? He's here in Paris." He's very confused. So remember, Mr. Lorry left the night before Charles did. Mr. Lorry did not know that Charles received a letter from Gabelle saying he needed help to get out of prison. So Mr. Lorry has no idea that Charles, the very next night, traveled, to Paris by himself and was abducted by quote unquote escorts and then put in prison. I just have a note here that it took Charles 10 days to 2 weeks to get to Paris, which is just what I discussed over here. And Lucy says, "Has he been here some days, 3 or 4? I don't know how many. I can't recollect my thoughts. An errand of generosity brought him here unknown. He was stopped at the barrier and sent to prison." The old man uttered an irrepressible cry. At the same time, a loud noise of feet and voices came pouring into the courtyard. And Mr. Lorry gets very alarmed. The doctor says, "What is that noise?" And Mr. Lorry says, "Don't look outside. Don't touch that blind," because he has the windows closed. And Dr. Manette says, "My dear friend, I have a charmed life in this city. I have been a Bastille prisoner. There is no patriot in Paris or in France who, knowing me to have been a prisoner in the Bastille, would touch me, except to overwhelm me with embraces or carry me in triumph. My old pain has given me a power that has brought us through the barrier and gained us news of Charles there." So they found out about Charles when they came through the barrier of the city. And so we have to infer then that the reason Lucy and Dr. Manette came to Paris is because they just knew that it would be a dangerous place. I'm sure Dr. Manette knew it would be a dangerous place for Charles to be. And they don't know when they left London that he was in prison, but when they get to the barrier, they find out that he was. So Dr. Manette insists to know what is the noise, and Mr. Lorry keeps saying, "Please don't look, especially not Lucy." Absolutely, she can't look. Mr. Lorry asks what prison he's in, and Dr. Manette says La Force. And this alarms Mr. Lorry. He knows that this is a terrible, terrible, terrible place for anyone to be. He says, "I say this because what I must bid you to do for Charles's sake is the hardest thing to do of all. You must instantly be obedient, still, and quiet. You must let me put you in a room at the back here. You must leave your father and me alone for 2 minutes. As there are life and death in the world, you must not delay." So he's like, okay, there's all this stuff going on outside by that grindstone. He doesn't want Lucy to see that. He needs to talk to Dr. Manette alone. So Lucy, she agrees. She says, "I can see in your face that you know I can do nothing else than this. I will be submissive to you." She trusts Mr. Lorry, and so she leaves and goes to a room in the back. And immediately, Dr. Manette and Mr. Lorry start talking. They look out the window and they see all the people out there working at the grindstone. And the description of these people is pretty terrifying. They're wearing false eyebrows and false mustaches. They're full of blood and sweat. They're all yelling and howling. Some of the women are drinking wine. The eye could not detect one creature in the group free from the smear of blood. So even the reference to creature is dehumanizing them, shouldering one another to get next to the sharpening stone. So this is clarifying for us that this is what they're doing. Were men stripped to the waist with a stain all over their limbs and bodies, men of all sorts of rags with a stain upon those rags, men devilishly set off with spoils of women's lace and silk and ribbon, with the stain dyeing those trifles through and through, hatchets, knives, bayonets, swords, all brought to be sharpened. So these are the revolutionaries who are killing people with these swords, and they come back to resharpen them after they have beheaded people. So Mr. Lorry whispers to Dr. Manette, they are murdering the prisoners. If you are sure of what you say, if you really have the power you think you have, as I believe you do, make yourself known to these devils and get taken to LaForce. It may be too late, I don't know, but let it not be a minute later. So he's like, Charles, if he's in LaForce, could already be murdered because this is what they're doing. So he tells Dr. Manette to go out and talk to those people. So Dr. Manette pressed his hand, hastened bareheaded out of the room, and was in the courtyard when Mr. Lorry regained the blind. So he rushes right out there. And he tells them who he is. And the response of the revolutionaries is, live the Bastille prisoner, help for the Bastille prisoner's kindred in LaForce, room for the Bastille prisoner in front here, save the prisoner Evermond at LaForce. So when they discover who he is, they do what he asks. So Mr. Lorry closes the blind again. He feels reassured. He goes and finds Lucy, and the child, young Lucy, and Miss Pross are with her. So this is funny. It never occurred to him to be surprised by their appearance until a long time afterwards when he sat watching them in such a quiet as the night knew. So, when did they come in? we don't know. They came in probably at the same time as Lucy and Dr. Manette, but Mr. Lorry was so shocked to see Lucy and the doctor that he didn't notice Miss Pross and young Lucy. But of course they're there. And then Lucy had by that time fallen into a stupor on the floor at his feet, clinging to his hand. Miss Pross had laid the child down on his own bed, and her head had gradually fallen on the pillow beside her pretty charge. So they're basically in Mr. Lorry's room, and they have fallen asleep. And it's going to be a long, long night, obviously, because this is very scary. So twice more in the darkness, the bell at the great gate sounded, and the eruption was repeated, and the grindstone whirled and spluttered. "What is it?" cried Lucy, affrighted. "Hush, the soldiers' swords are sharpened there," said Mr. Lorry. "The place is national property now and used as a kind of armory, my love." So he tells her why. He doesn't want her looking out there because the soldiers are sharpening their swords. And of course, these soldiers don't look like soldiers that we imagine them to be. They are peasants who are poor and who are crazed. So what happens here is another description of one of the murderers who's tired, who finds one of the carriages that belong to Monseigneur that's still sitting outside the house, and staggering into that gorgeous vehicle, he climbs in at the door and shut himself up to take rest on its dainty cushions. So juxtaposing just the poor people with their rags for clothes and the blood all over them, killing ruthlessly all these people with knives in the prison. Then they fall asleep on these beautiful carriages and in these beautiful homes that they have taken over. The great grindstone earth had turned when Mr. Lorry looked out again. So this is referring to it's now a new day. And the sun was red on the courtyard, but the lesser grindstone stood alone there in the calm morning air, with a red upon it that the sun had never given and would never take away. So the comparison of earth is a rotating grindstone alongside the actual grindstone covered with blood is an interesting, it's a memorable image for sure. It could be a quiz question. What is the other bigger grindstone? It's earth. So some important things to know here, just details, is that Tellson's is in a wing of the seized aristocrat, the Monseigneur who took chocolate. The revolutionaries are stationed in the rest of the house. And so it's not like they cross paths. You know, what part of the house is like cordoned off. It's like its own little apartment, sort of, is where Tellson's is. And the rest of the house is a revolutionary sort of home. The grindstone is a knife sharpener in the courtyard, and it's where all the murderers come to sharpen their weapons. Lucy and Dr. Manette come to Paris. We can infer that Charles's note motivates them to go, and they find out that Charles is in prison when they get to one of the borders. We don't really know if it's the barrier to France or the barrier to the city. Probably the barrier to Paris is what I would imagine. I don't think they knew in London that he was in danger. I think they literally just came because of his note, and then when they got here, they found out that he was imprisoned. And then we also find out that Dr. Manette can influence the revolutionaries to free Charles, because Dr. Manette was a peasant who, I mean, he wasn't a poor peasant, but he was not an aristocrat, and he had been imprisoned unfairly by the aristocrats and suffered. So he is sort of a symbol for the revolution, which is why he has that power. So in chapter 3, it says one of the first considerations which arose in the business mind of Mr. Lorry when business hours came round was this, that he had no right to imperil Tellson's by sheltering the wife of an immigrant prisoner under the bank roof. So he realizes that like the business could be in jeopardy if he was keeping like an enemy of the state in the bank. I mean, even though Dr. Manette is there and is associated with Lucy, there's also the association with the emigrant, who's Charles, who currently has no rights and who is right now the greatest enemy of the people. So he decides he needs to find some place for them to live. They can't stay there, and he is a strict man of business. At first, his mind reverted to Defarge, and he thought of finding out the wine shop again and taking counsel with its master in reference to the safest dwelling place in this distracted state of the city. But the same consideration that suggested him repudiated him. He lived in the most violent quarter, so he realizes, like, Defarge is a friendly person. It was Defarge who helped get Dr. Manette out when they went to rescue him long, long ago. But Mr. Lorry also knows that Defarge lived in Saint Antoine, still lives in Saint Antoine, which is one of the most violent areas of the city. So he doesn't really feel like he can go and ask Monsieur Defarge for where to live. So it's the next day, noon. The doctor has not come back. And so Lorry talks with Lucy about this. And she says that her father had spoken of hiring a lodging for a short term in that quarter near the banking house. So she says that Dr. Manette had said earlier to her that perhaps, we could find a place to stay near the bank. So Mr. Lorry likes that idea. So he goes out to find a place for them to stay. And he finds a place high up in a removed by street where the closed blinds and all the other windows of a high melancholy square of buildings mark deserted homes. So he finds a little apartment up higher in a building near the bank where very few people live. So he feels like they would be safe. To this lodging, he at once removed Lucy and her child and Miss Pross, giving them what comfort he could and much more than he had himself. He left Jerry with them. So, I forgot about Jerry. Jerry went with Mr. Lorry, so Jerry's also in Paris. So he now becomes sort of the guard for Lucy and Miss Pross and Dr. Manette and little Lucy. And when Mr. Lorry gets back to the bank, he hears footsteps coming up the stairs. So someone else is coming. In a few moments, a man stood in his presence who, with a keenly observant look at him, addressed him by his name. Your servant, said Mr. Lorry. Do you know me? So this man knows Mr. Lorry, and Mr. Lorry's a little confused. He was a strongly made man with dark curling hair, from 45 to 50 years of age. For answer, he repeated without any change of emphasis the words, Do you know me? I have seen you somewhere. Perhaps at my wine shop? So this is Monsieur Defarge. Monsieur Defarge has come to see Mr. Lorry. You come from Dr. Manette? Yes, I come from Dr. Manette. And what says he? What does he send me? Defarge gave into his anxious hand an open scrap of paper. It bore the words in the doctor's writing, which said, Charles is safe, but I cannot safely leave this place yet. I have obtained the favor that the bearer has a short note from Charles to his wife. Let the bearer see his wife. So just remember, Darnay asked Defarge, if he could get a note to Mr. Lorry, and Defarge said no. He would not do anything to help Darnay, but he will do something to help Dr. Manette. Remember, Dr. Manette, Defarge used to be a servant to Dr. Manette. He used to, help him. And so there's a relationship there. So for sure, he is willing to bring this note to Mr. Lorry. It was dated from La Forest within an hour. So this has just been written. It's very new. So we know that Charles Darnay is still alive. Will you accompany me, said Mr. Lorry, joyfully relieved after reading the note, to where his wife resides? Yes, returned Defarge, scarcely noticing as yet in what a curiously reserved and mechanical way Defarge spoke. Mr. Lorry put on his hat, and they went down into the courtyard. There they found two women, one knitting. So Defarge is acting strange, reserved and mechanical. We can infer that Defarge feels like a traitor. Like here he is talking with the emigrant's family. So, Charles Darnay is the enemy, according to the whole country. And Defarge is a revolutionary leader. And here he is standing in this British bank, communicating with Darnay's family. So he's uncomfortable. I'm sure we can infer that. Then out in the courtyard, we have Madame Defarge, and Mr. Lorry remembers her. So friendly. Oh, Madame Defarge, surely. It is she, observed her husband. Does Madame go with us? Inquired Mr. Lorry, seeing that she moved as they moved. Yes, that she may be able to recognize the faces and know the persons. It is for their safety. Which makes me wonder. I just remember how Madame Defarge has no soft feelings for anybody. I mean, remember that she immediately knitted Charles Darnay's name into her knitting, and Monsieur Defarge questioned that. I don't think she would have any way of protecting Lucy. I feel like she would want to do just the opposite. So this should make us uncomfortable. It does seem like Monsieur Defarge is uncomfortable. Mr. Lorry is starting to notice this behavior in Monsieur Defarge. He looks at him dubiously and led the way. Both the women followed, the second one being the Vengeance. So remember, this is the right-hand lady of Madame Defarge. So they go through the little streets. They get to where Lucy and Miss Pross are living. And it says here, Dearest, take courage, I am well, and your father has influence around me. You cannot answer this. Kiss our child for me. So this is a note that Charles actually wrote for Lucy. That was all the writing. It was so much, however, to her who received it that she turned from Defarge to his wife and kissed one of the hands that knitted. So not only have they brought a note to Mr. Lorry, just saying that, he needs to stay and Charles is safe, but they do have a note from Charles to Lucy. And Lucy is so overwhelmed by this note. It was a passionate, loving, thankful, womanly action. So she looks at Madame Defarge like, oh, you're a woman, you're a wife, you understand how important this is. She thinks that there's going to be some sisterly connection between them. But of course, that is not the case. Madame Defarge has no response to her, and she drops, Lucy's hand cold and heavy and went back to her knitting. There was something in its touch that gave Lucy a check. She stopped in the act of putting the note in her bosom, and with her hands yet at her neck, looked terrified at Madame Defarge. Madame Defarge met the lifted eyebrow and forehead with a cold, impassive stare. So she is someone to be feared, as we know. It goes on here to say that Mr. Lorry explains, there are frequent risings in the streets, and although it is not likely they will ever trouble you, Madame Defarge wishes to see those whom she has the power to protect at such times. So Mr. Lorry is telling Lucy that the reason Madame Defarge is here is because she has the power to protect you and Miss Pross and little Lucy, now that she knows you. And Mr. Lorry, rather haltingly in his reassuring words, as the stony manner of all three impressed itself upon him, I state the case, Citizen Defarge. So he's unsure, as he looks at Madame Defarge and the Vengeance, and even Monsieur Defarge, he's wondering, are they actually here to protect Lucy or not? And he looks at Monsieur Defarge for confirmation, and Defarge looked gloomily at his wife and gave no other answer than a gruff sound of acquiescence, which means yes, she's here to protect her. But we can infer that's probably not the case. You had better, Lucy, said Mr. Lorry, doing all he could to propitiate by tone and manner. Have the dear child here, and our good Miss Pross. Our good Pross Defarge is an English lady and knows no French. So he introduces Miss Pross as the English nanny. And then Miss Pross has a really funny response. She is rooted in conviction that she was more than a match for any foreigner, and she was not to be shaken by distress and danger. She folds her arms and observed in English to the Vengeance, whom her eyes first encountered, "Well, I am sure, Boldface, I hope you are pretty well." So she sort of is sassy to the Vengeance, and I don't know if the Vengeance understood anything she said. Probably not. She also bestowed a British cough on Madame Defarge, but neither of the two took much heed of her. "Is that his child?" said Madame Defarge, stopping in her work for the first time and pointing her knitting needle at little Lucy as if it were the finger of fate. "Yes, Madame," answered Mr. Lorry. "This is our poor prisoner's darling daughter and only child." So they're trying to create some sympathy here. The shadow attendant on Madame Defarge and her party seemed to fall, so threatening and dark, on the child that her mother instinctively kneeled to the ground beside her and held her to her breast. So these people have no instinct to protect little Lucy. "It is enough, my husband," said Madame Defarge. "I have seen them. We may go." But the suppressed manner had enough menace in it, not visible and presented, but indistinct and withheld, to alarm Lucy into saying, as she laid her appealing hand on Madame Defarge's dress. Lucy has no sense. She doesn't realize that the more she touches this woman and begs her, the more disgusted Madame Defarge is going to become. But she is so desperate. She says, "You will be good to my poor husband. You will do him no harm. You will help me to see him if you can." And Madame Defarge says, "Your husband is not my business here. It is the daughter of your father who is my business here," meaning you, Lucy. So Dr. Manette and Lucy is all she cares about. "For my sake, then, be merciful to my husband, for my child's sake." She will put her hands together and pray for you to be merciful. "We are more afraid of you than of these others." Obviously, I am too more afraid of her. Madame Defarge received it as a compliment. Of course she did, and looked at her husband, Defarge, who had been uneasily biting his thumbnail and looking at her, collected his face into a sterner expression. "What is it that your husband says in that little letter? Influence. He says something touching influence." "That my father has much influence around him," Lucy clarifies. "Surely it will release him. Let it do so." So Madame Defarge just pivots right back to Dr. Manette. That's the only one that she would be loyal to. And she says, the letter says he's going to have influence. Let's hope that that's the case. And that's it. Lucy will not give up. I wish some adult in the room, like Mr. Lorry, would tell her to quit begging Madame Defarge. But she says, I implore you to have pity on me. Oh, sister woman, think of me as a wife and mother. Well, remember, Madame Defarge is not a mother. She is looking now coldly as ever at Lucy. And she turns to her friend, the Vengeance, and she says, the wives and mothers we have been used to see since we were as little as this child, and much less, have not been greatly considered. We have known their husbands and fathers laid in prison and kept from them often enough. All our lives we have seen our sister women suffer in themselves and in their children, poverty, nakedness, hunger, thirst, sickness, misery, oppression, and neglect of all kinds. We have seen nothing else, returned the Vengeance. We have borne this a long time, says Madame Defarge to Lucy. Judge you. Is it likely that the trouble of one wife and mother would be much to us now? So they have no sympathy for her because, first of all, Lucy is not poor. And this whole revolution is because of the suffering that families have endured for decades under the aristocracy. And Lucy is clueless to that. And that has definitely struck a nerve with Madame Defarge. So thank God they finally leave. And Mr. Lorry just tries to encourage Lucy to be courageous. Courage, he says to her. We have to be thankful here for what's happening. And Lucy says, I am not thankless, but that dreadful woman seems to throw a shadow on me and all my hopes. That's right, she does. Tut, tut, said Mr. Lorry. What is this despondency in the brave little breast? A shadow indeed, no substance in it, Lucy. So he tries to encourage her. But the shadow of the manner of these Defarges was dark upon himself. So Mr. Lorry sees it, and in his secret mind, it troubled him greatly. So legitimate questions here are like, how much can we trust the Defarges? What is Madame Defarge's actual plans for Lucy and her child? Why does she really want to see them? Is it to protect them? Will the Defarges support Dr. Manette's efforts to free Charles? That's another legitimate question. So this chapter is really creating suspense, a lot of unanswered questions, remembering back to the fact that Dickens was writing this as a serial. He wants people to be eager to find out what happens next.